Welcome, friends. I am very glad you have joined me today. I want to talk to you about something that is happening right now, something that is being presented to you in the newspapers and on the television screens as a great leap forward for cooperation and prosperity. It is a story about Canada, it is a story about Mexico, and it is a story about the United States standing in the shadows orchestrating the movement of capital and resources across this continent. We are looking at a recent meeting, a high level economic dialogue, they call it, where officials from Canada and Mexico are patting one another on the back, talking about joint action on minerals, on infrastructure, on the pharmaceutical industry. They are bringing hundreds of business leaders, 370 of them, they tell us proudly, representing the titans of industry from 10 provinces. They speak of an ethical industry, of advanced manufacturing, of reducing regulatory difficulties. Now, if you listen to the language they use, it sounds benign, it sounds technical, it sounds like sensible people making sensible arrangements to make sure everyone has enough copper and lithium and that the trains run on time. But I want us to stop for a moment. I want us to peel back that polite diplomatic language and ask the question that we must always ask when we are confronted with the maneuvers of the capitalist class. Who benefits? Who is doing the work? And who is accumulating the profit? Because what we are witnessing here is not a partnership of equals, and it is certainly not a partnership designed to uplift the working people of Mexico or the working people of Canada. It is a consolidation of corporate power. It is a reorganization of supply chains to serve the interests of North American capital in its global struggle against competitors, primarily China. Let's start with the basics, because we need to understand the economic engine that drives these meetings. We are living in a global capitalist system that is in a state of profound crisis and transition. For the last 40 or 50 years, we have lived under a regime we call neoliberalism. This was the idea that if you just let the corporations do whatever they want, if you tear down the borders for capital, but not for people, never for people, if you strip away the regulations that protect the environment and the workers, if you privatize everything that isn't nailed down, then somehow, magically, the wealth would trickle down and we would all be better off. Well, look around you. Look at the inequality in the United States. Look at the stagnant wages in Canada. Look at the poverty that persists in Mexico despite decades of NAFTA. The promise was a lie, and now the capitalists know that the old way isn't working quite like it used to. Supply chains are fragile. Geopolitics is messy, so they are shifting gears. They are moving from globalization to what they call nearshoring or friendshoring. That is the context for this meeting about minerals and infrastructure. When the Canadian official talks about critical moments and shared values, what he is really talking about is securing the raw materials necessary for the next generation of capitalist production, the batteries for electric vehicles, the components for digital technology, the rare earth minerals that are the oil of the 21st century. Canada has the mining companies. The Toronto Stock Exchange is the global hub for mining finance. Something like 75% of the world's mining companies are headquartered in Canada. They are the financiers, the organizers of extraction. Mexico has the resources, and crucially, Mexico has the labor. This dynamic is as old as capitalism itself. It is the dynamic of the center and the periphery, even within a trade bloc like the USMCA. The Canadian capital, allied with American capital, looks at Mexico not as a partner in human development, but as a destination for investment. They explicitly say they want to facilitate the investment. What does that mean when a Canadian mining giant goes into a community in Mexico, perhaps an indigenous community, perhaps a rural farming community, and they want to dig a massive hole in the ground to extract lithium or silver? Facilitating investment usually means ensuring that the local people cannot say no. It means ensuring that the environmental laws are flexible enough to allow for the contamination of the local water supply. It means ensuring that the taxes paid to the Mexican state are kept low enough that the surplus value, the profit generated by that mine, flows north back to the shareholders in Toronto and New York rather than staying in the community to build schools or hospitals or housing. They talk about reducing regulatory difficulties. I want you to hear that phrase very clearly. Regulatory difficulties. To a corporation, a regulation that stops them from dumping toxic sludge into a river is a difficulty. A regulation that requires them to pay a living wage and provide safety equipment is a difficulty. A regulation that recognizes the land rights of indigenous peoples is a difficulty. When these 370 business leaders get together with government officials, they are not lobbying for stricter safety standards. They are not lobbying for higher wages for Mexican auto workers. They are lobbying to remove the obstacles to their accumulation of profit. They are asking the state, the governments of Canada and Mexico, to use its power to clear the path for capital. This is the essence of the capitalist state. We are taught in school that the government represents the people, that it is a neutral arbiter looking out for the common good. But in a capitalist society, the state has a very specific function. It is there to secure the conditions for the reproduction of capitalism. It is there to protect private property, to enforce contracts, and to manage the workforce. When the Canadian government brings a delegation of business leaders to Mexico, the government is acting as the sales agent for those businesses. They are using the diplomatic weight of the nation to open doors for private profit. They are using public resources, your tax dollars, if you are Canadian, to subsidize the expansion of private corporations. And let's look at the sectors they are excited about. Pharmaceutical industry, aerospace, advanced manufacturing. These are high-tech, high-profit industries. But ask yourself, how does the integration of these industries across borders affect the worker? We have seen this story before. We saw it with the auto industry under NAFTA. The promise was that moving factories to Mexico would help Mexican workers by providing jobs, and that it would help North American consumers by lowering prices. What actually happened? The corporations played the workers against each other. They told the worker in Oshawa, Ontario, or Detroit, Michigan, if you demand higher wages, if you don't accept cuts to your pension, we will move the plant to Mexico. And they told the worker in Mexico, you are lucky to have this job at $2 an hour. And if you try to form an independent union, if you try to fight for better conditions, we will close this factory and move it to Vietnam or Bangladesh. Or this is the whip of the market. It is a mechanism for disciplining labor. By integrating the labor markets of Canada, the US, and Mexico without integrating the labor rights and the wage standards, they create a race to the bottom. The joint action they are planning on minerals and infrastructure is designed to make that race even more efficient. They want to build the roads, the railways, the ports, the infrastructure, not so that you can visit your grandmother more easily, but so that commodities can move faster from the point of extraction to the point of production to the point of sale. Every minute that a commodity sits idle is a minute of lost profit. So the taxpayers of Mexico and Canada will be asked to foot the bill for new infrastructure projects that are primarily designed to serve the logistical needs of transnational corporations like General Motors, Bombardier, and Barrick Gold. We must also talk about the ecological dimension of this joint action. Capitalism treats nature as a free gift. It treats the earth not as our home, not as a complex living system that sustains us, but as a warehouse of resources to be plundered and a sewer for waste. The push for critical minerals is being sold to us under the guise of the green transition. We are told we need to mine more lithium, cobalt, and nickel so we can build electric cars and stop climate change. But let's look at the logic here. The goal is not to reorganize our society so that we need less energy or so that we have efficient public transportation for everyone. The goal is to save the auto industry. The goal is to replace 1 billion internal combustion engine cars with 1 billion electric cars. To do that requires an explosion of mining activity. It requires digging up vast territories, often in ecologically sensitive areas. And who pays the price for that? It is not the executives in the boardrooms in Toronto. It is the communities living next to the mines. When they talk about joint action on minerals, they are talking about coordinating the legal and political frameworks to make it easier to open these mines. They are talking about how to overcome the resistance of local populations who do not want their water poisoned. They are creating a unified front of North American capital to extract the wealth of the earth as quickly and cheaply as possible. This is not a partnership, it is an extraction pact. And notice who is not in the room. Where are the representatives of the labor unions? Where are the representatives of the indigenous nations whose land sits on top of these minerals? Where are the environmental groups? Where are the community organizations? They are not there. They are not the stakeholders that matter to these governments. The only stakeholders that matter are the ones with the capital to invest. This is the definition of a class dictatorship. It doesn't mean a dictator in a military uniform standing on a balcony. It means a system where one class, the employer class, the capitalist class, dictates the fundamental decisions about what we produce, how we produce it, and what we do with the surplus. The rest of us just have to live with the consequences. We need to understand this meeting in the context of the history of imperialism in Latin America. For centuries, the wealth of Latin America has been drained to feed the development of Europe and North America. Eduardo Galeano famously wrote about the open veins of Latin America: gold, silver, sugar, rubber, oil. It all flowed out, leaving poverty and underdevelopment behind. Now, in the 21st century, the commodities have changed. Now it is lithium for batteries and aerospace components, but the structure remains the same. Canada likes to present itself as the nice neighbor, distinct from the aggressive imperialism of the United States. But in Latin America, Canadian mining companies are often feared and hated just as much, if not more, than American corporations. They are often involved in conflicts where local activists are threatened, where violence is used to suppress dissent. This joint action plan is an attempt to legitimize and streamline this extraction, to wrap it in the flag of diplomacy and cooperation. And why now? Why this urgency? Because the United States is terrified of losing its hegemony. The U.S. empire is in decline. China is rising, offering alternative sources of investment and trade to countries in the global south. The United States cannot compete purely on economic terms anymore, so it is retreating into a fortress North America. It wants to lock Canada and Mexico into its orbit to ensure that its supply chains are secure from geopolitical disruption. This is the decoupling from China that you hear about. But for Mexico and Canada, this is a trap. It locks them into a subordinate position within a U.S. dominated bloc. It limits their ability to trade freely with the rest of the world. It forces them to align their economies with the strategic military and economic interests of Washington. When the Canadian official speaks of over 240 organizations and 370 business leaders, he is bragging about the size of the army of capital that he has mobilized. He is telling his Mexican counterparts, look at the money we can bring. Look at the investment we can pour into your country. It is a seduction, but like all seductions by the powerful, it comes with strings attached. The investment will come, yes. Factories will be built, mines will be dug, but the profits will leave. The wages will remain low because low wages are Mexico's comparative advantage in this system. If wages in Mexico rose to Canadian levels, the capital would flee. The entire logic of the integration depends on maintaining that inequality. The system requires poverty in Mexico to subsidize consumption in Canada and the U.S. So we have to look at this news story and see it for what it is. It is not a celebration of friendship. It is a business deal between the managing committees of the bourgeoisie of two nations. It is a plan to intensify the exploitation of labor and nature in North America. It is a strategy to shore up the power of Western capital in a changing world. And for those of us who believe in a different kind of world, a world where the economy serves the people, not the other way around, we must be critical. We must not be fooled by the smiles and the handshakes and the talk of ethical industry. There is no ethical industry under capitalism because the fundamental relationship, the relationship between the employer who buys labor power and the worker who sells it, is a relationship of exploitation. We must ask, what would a genuine partnership look like? A genuine partnership between the peoples of North America would start with harmonizing labor standards upward, not downward. It would mean a Mexican worker, a Canadian worker, and an American worker earning the same living wage for the same work. It would mean the free movement of people, not just capital. If a Canadian corporation can cross the border to make money in Mexico, why can't a Mexican worker cross the border to make a living in Canada without fear of deportation? A genuine partnership would focus on shared public goods, on health care, on education, on cleaning up the environment that we all share. It would be based on solidarity, not competition. But that is not what is on the table here. What is on the table is a plan to make the rich richer. And they are telling you this openly if you know how to decode their language. They are telling you that they are going to pave the way for business, which means they are going to bulldoze whatever stands in the way of business. This is the reality of the system we live in. It is a system that relentlessly expands, relentlessly commodifies, and relentlessly exploits. And meetings like this one are simply the planning sessions for the next phase of that expansion. As we move forward in this discussion, we are going to dive deeper into the mechanics of this exploitation. We are going to look at the theory of value, at how surplus is extracted, and how the global division of labor functions to keep some nations rich and others poor. But for now, let this be our starting point. The joint action on minerals and infrastructure is a maneuver in the class war. It is the generals of capital coordinating their forces, and we, the working class, need to understand their strategy if we are ever going to develop a strategy of our own.